The Dallas Cowboys finished the 2023 season with a 12-5 record and made the playoffs for the third straight year. This wasn't just their third straight year making the playoffs. This was their third straight 12-win season, and like every year since 1995, they failed to make the NFC Championship game. But the Cowboys' future genuinely scares me. I know everyone likes to get their jokes and their memes in about the Cowboys, and that comes with being America's team, but you may be surprised to know that they're the only team since the start of the 2021 season to have 3 straight 12-win seasons. That's right, not even the Chiefs have done that in the last 3 years. But despite the regular season success, they have a record of 1-3 in the postseason in the Mike McCarthy era, and we are at a pivotal point in the Cowboys' timeline. Dak Prescott is entering the final year of his deal and has a cap hit of $66.9 million, and despite finishing first in offensive points per game in 2023 and 5th in points allowed per game defensively, the future of the Cowboys is uncertain, and that's a pretty big understatement. So what can they actually do moving forward, and what will they do moving forward? Well, we're going to try and answer that in today's video. Now let's begin. We are starting today's video by discussing some of the key points within the Cowboys' 2023 season. They started out 2-0 with dominant wins over the Giants and Jets and outscored the New York teams by a combined 70-10 through the first 2 weeks of the year. These weren't just 2 wins to start the year where they scraped by and they were 2-0 because the opposing teams beat themselves, and Dallas was the direct beneficiary of big mistakes at key times. No, these were dominant wins. They lost to the Josh Dobbs-led Cardinals in Week 3 and eventually went to San Francisco in Week 5 and lost by 32 points on Sunday Night Football with a score of 42-10. This was a reality check for the Cowboys, and whenever the Cowboys not just lose on primetime, but get absolutely mauled on primetime, the internet takes it and runs with it more than you can imagine. They would lose 4 weeks later in Philly, but would go on to win the next 5, including avenging the Philly loss in Week 14, as they would beat them with a score of 33-13 before a trip to Buffalo, which was really the start of the end of the Cowboys season. They allowed over 250 rushing yards on the ground, and Buffalo won 31-10. They went to Miami on Christmas Eve, and there was a lot of anticipation for this game because Miami had not beat a team above 500 until that point in the year, and they, like Dallas, would get on teams early and not let up. We all know all about the 70-point game Miami had against Denver in Week 3 of the 23 season, but Dallas actually had 9 double-digit wins in 2023, and there was a reason they had a point difference of 194. They absolutely beat the shit out of bad teams. But after losing to Miami in Week 16, they won a controversial game against the Lions in Week 17, for those who remember how that game ended, before again absolutely killing a bad team as they beat the Commanders 38-10 in Week 18. This set us up for a game in the wildcard round against the Packers, in which Dallas lost with a score of 48-32, and my big concern with the Cowboys comes from this game. Not just the result from one wildcard game one time, but the culmination of several games like this over the past few years. The 2 big ones from the 23 regular season were, of course, San Francisco and Buffalo, where Dallas didn't look like they belonged on the same field as either of those teams. I thought San Francisco was going to win the Week 5 game before it was played, but I thought it was going to be something along the lines of 20-17 or 23-20. Not 42-10. Not in a game where Dallas had just 197 yards of offense, while San Francisco had over 400 and looked like they were, at least up until that point, the best team in the NFL by far. Dallas's 12 wins in each of the last 3 years has not happened by accident. You don't luck into 3 straight 12-win seasons and be the only team to do that during this time period. But what genuinely concerns me is they have been a good team over the last 3 years, and even have periods where they play like a great team, and even have periods where it looks like they can make a run, but they always come back down to earth at the seemingly worst time, and I don't know how they can get over the hump and actually, make a run. Cowboys fans were upset with how free agency, or at least the first few waves of free agency, went for them, as they only signed one player that was not a Cowboy in 2023, and that's linebacker Eric Kendricks. Kendricks at times is a pretty good player, and he openly said he wanted to play under defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer, who of course was Kendricks' head coach for the first 7 years of his career in Minnesota. And for as much as I like Hendricks as a player and as a high IQ linebacker, a 32-year-old off-ball linebacker is not going to be the difference in the Cowboys winning a championship or not, especially in a year or in an offseason where they lost guys in free agency like Dorrance Armstrong, Tyler Biadasz, Dante Fowler, and Lyle Collins, among others. The free agency moves for Dallas, or lack of, led Cowboys fan Skip Bayless to tweet, quote, all in, comma, my ass, end quote, with the comma doing some very heavy lifting there, of course. But Skip was upset like the rest of the Cowboys fan base were because they didn't make any moves after implying they were going to go all in for a big run and to try and win a Super Bowl in the final year of Dak Prescott's current contract. Which, hypothetically, if they did and they won a Super Bowl this year, it wouldn't matter. Nothing at that point would matter because they did what everyone has been saying for 30 years that they can't do. But I sit here a few weeks before the draft and have no type of confidence in this team entering the 24 season, and the way they went about building the roster this offseason to me was baffling. Having said that, I am not a proponent of building a team through free agency, and if you're looking for me to sit here and to crown the Commanders big winners in free agency by bringing in guys like Austin Eckler and Bobby Wagner and thinking those two players are the missing pieces, along with the Cowboys they brought over, of course, in year one of a rebuild and say Washington is going to make a run next year, well, this is the wrong channel for you. But what the Cowboys did this offseason, or didn't do, should I say, reminds me a lot of a slightly more successful New Orleans Saints. I have zero confidence in what the Saints are doing as they max out the cap every year without ever really hitting a full rebuild, and the results, well, show for them every year. There's a reason they haven't won a playoff game in a few years now, since 2018 to be exact, and that's for New Orleans, of course, but what Dallas is doing isn't too far from that. We're only 1 year into the 2023 draftees' careers, but what we saw from the Cowboys rookies last year was underwhelming, and that's not just from one or two players, but across the board. The biggest contributor they had was either defensive lineman Mazi Smith, who finished the year with 13 total tackles, or second-round tight end Luke Schoonmaker, who finished the year with 8 receptions for 65 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, the general dysfunction of the Cowboys franchise scares the hell out of me, especially with Mazi Smith and how that's been handled. There's an article written by Nick Harris of DallasCowboys.com that has a direct quote from head coach Mike McCarthy that says, quote, Smith lost some weight. Last year was a big adjustment for him, so I think there's a lot that goes into the transition these guys make. I think now he'll have a better plan to be at the proper weight and maintain it, end quote. Now, I don't think this is me overanalyzing this, but the part where he says, I think he'll have a better plan to be at the proper weight, really rubs me the wrong way with where this franchise is and where this franchise is headed. You spent the 26th overall pick on Mazi Smith last year. This was not your 4th round pick or your 3rd first round pick of the night. This was a guy who you drafted to plug holes along the interior part of opposing offensive lines and to be able to beat the Eagles and be able to stop the tush push or inside zone or every other play the Eagles run up the middle for that matter too. During the 2023 draft, Bleacher Report had A.J. Brown and Micah Parsons on as analysts, and Micah even said after this pick was made, no more tush-push A.J., and here we are less than 365 days later after a disappointing rookie season from Mazi, insinuating we didn't have a plan for him to begin with. For a guy who was never going to be a small player, I mean, Mazi is north of 330 pounds, and that really rubs me the wrong way. I know the low-hanging fruit is to bring down Dak as he threw 2 interceptions against the Packers in the playoff game, with one of them putting Green Bay in the red zone immediately, and the other, of course, being a pick 6, and we'll get to Dak, but there is so much dysfunction within the organization and what their goals are that, regardless of how the 2024 draft goes for them, I don't have a lot of confidence in them entering the 24 season. Oh, and that's without even saying the Eagles improved by bringing in both Saquon Barkley and pass rusher Bryce Huff. To go back to a point made earlier, there is a difference between the Commanders bringing in a hodgepodge of guys past their prime, and the Eagles being a playoff team last year, and the Eagles improving and in a big way at 2 positions before the draft takes place, all while Dallas sat back and ultimately did nothing. Now, one other big part that scares me moving forward with this team is the uncertainty around quarterback Dak Prescott. Dak and the Cowboys did not work out a long-term deal this offseason, or have not yet if they do at some point in time. My big concern with this is Dak's had 35 or more passing touchdowns in 2 of the last 3 years. He finished second in MVP voting this year after a 4,500-yard, 36-touchdown season in which he led the league in passing touchdowns, by 4 touchdowns, by the way. And we all know what happened in their lone playoff game. But this is not a quarterback who broke out in his first year starting, or a guy who's entering his 4th NFL season, and we finally saw the big leap from him. This is a quarterback, fair or not, that's 2-5 lifetime in the postseason, and a guy who, again, fair or not, more often than not, shrinks in big games. Their last 3 playoff losses were to the 49ers twice and to the Packers once, and the first San Francisco loss was in a game where they put up 17 points at home, and Dak completed just over 50% of his passes and did not look good in this game. The second playoff loss to San Francisco was in a game where they put up just 12 points, and in a game where Dak threw multiple interceptions. 12 points in a road playoff game is not acceptable if you're going to win a Super Bowl. Now, for the Dak fans out there, they would want me to acknowledge the 300-yard, 4 passing touchdown game against the Bucs in the wild card round of the 2022 playoffs, but that was against an 8-9 division-winning team, and we all know what happened the following week. Now, this year against Green Bay was an all-around atrocious performance. You can blame Dak for essentially giving Green Bay 14 points with the pick 6 and the Jair interception that gave them the ball in the red zone, but you can't blame Dak for how bad the defense played the rest of the night. Now, in theory, Dak threw for 400 yards and had 3 touchdowns, but we all know those numbers were extremely inflated due to the game flow, and Green Bay was actually up by 32 points with 6 minutes left in the game. So now we're at a point where, do we pay Dak Prescott $60 million per year and go from there? Do we give Dak a 5-year, $300 million contract extension? I wouldn't want to, based on how he's played in big games. You can say what you want regarding Dak and how he has good numbers year in and year out, but what signature win have they had over the past few years? Was it in Week 2 of 2022 over the Bengals, in which Cooper Rush beat Cincy? Was it in Minnesota when they embarrassed the Vikings, who were a fraudulent 13-win team? Or was it the Eagles in 2023 when they were in the middle of a collapse? That's kind of the point here. So if they don't extend Dak, then there's another question that will need answering, and it's what's the future of not only CeeDee Lamb, but Micah Parsons? If you are either of those guys and they choose not to extend Dak Prescott, and you're left with uncertainty at the quarterback position in the middle of your prime, would you want to sign a 4 or 5 year extension with the team? No, and especially not in CeeDee's case, as his job relies on a quarterback being able to throw him the football. So when everything here is factored in, this is why the Cowboys' future scares me. I have no idea what they're going to do, and if they choose to go full rebuild, which, by the way, I don't think is a bad option considering the success they've had in the Dak Prescott era, or lack of in the postseason, you risk losing your 2 24-year-old superstars who countless other NFL franchises would offer multiple first-round picks for in a heartbeat, and especially in Micah's case, as he is a one-of-one player. But no superstar, not just CeeDee or Micah, is going to want to rebuild in their prime when they should be, at least in their minds, competing for championships. But would you give a quarterback who's won 2 career playoff games and choked in plenty of others a $300 million extension knowing Kirk Cousins just got 180 over 4 years? I wouldn't, and I don't envy the position the Cowboys are in moving forward. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as well as subscribe to the Football Analysis Podcast. The link is in the bio, and I will see you next time. Love you guys.